long enough, you can love me. I'll be just yours, you can hold me. Even let you undress my mind. Save it, play it, watch it, then press rewind. I can give you what you need. I can give you what you need. Breathe me in, taste my words, let me blow your mind. I'll take you far, far away. I'll make you feel alright. You gotta crave it and chase it until you're close enough to taste it. I can give you what you need. I can give you what you need.
There's nothing left. It's caught on video. The very last breath. 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 In our tiny grace. But just because it's real don't mean it's gonna work. I was out of your league.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Hi, we're going to get started, so if everybody could take their seats. Good morning. Thank you all for braving this rather wet and cold fall day. So we'll get started. My name is Bridget Schulte. I am the director of the Better Life Lab here at New America. We're excited to have you all here where we're launching our Care Index and our New America Care Report. This was a collaboration, the data and methodology collaboration with care.com, and we're delighted that they're here. Huge shout out to Joyce Hodel, who was an amazing partner in helping us come up with the methodology for how we could actually try to map out the infrastructure of childcare in this country. The idea for sort of the spark of this whole report was our president and CEO, Anne Marie Slaughter, and CEO and founder of care.com, Sheila Marcello, were on a panel together and got to talking and said, you know, there's so little we know about the infrastructure of childcare in this country. How can we try to fix something that we don't fully understand, and can we come up with a way to try to better measure that, to get a better picture of where we are now so that we can come up with better solutions for where we can go. And so that's how this whole project was born. The New America Care Report takes the information in the Care Index and goes further. It's a journalism project. So what we like, any care system, an early care and learning system, to be really functional, high quality, and effective needs three things, the three pillars of a great quality system, and that's high quality, affordability, and yet not on the backs of caregivers. You need to pay caregivers not only a living wage, but a good wage, and you need easily available, accessible care. And so those were the three pillars that we measured in every state and in the District of Columbia. And what we found was that no one state is doing all three things well, that there are a series of trade-offs that parents, families, businesses, policymakers have to make between cost, quality, and availability, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. You know, the United States, we've had a sea change in the way we organize our families in the last several decades. No longer do we have breadwinner homemaker families. Today, there is no one typical American family, and the majority of children have all parents in the workplace. And yet what we have, so while all parents are working, what has emerged is really a patchwork, fragmented system that isn't really working well for anyone. So one of the things that we did is once we came up with these measures of cost, quality, and availability, we grouped the states into quartiles, and then we actually traveled to one state in each of the quartiles from highest to lowest to really explore those trade-offs. What are people facing with cost, quality, and availability? We've traveled with video crews, so if you go to our website, you can see videos in all four of the states that really explore some of these trade-offs and tell some very personal stories. So we'd like to start off today playing you one from Illinois, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Gianna, she's 3. She'll be 4 this December. She's just the twinkle of my eye. She's everything to me. She's the reason why I work hard and every day spending time with her and the kids.
I'll be late for school.
It's hard to talk about because I don't get a lot of time to spend with her, but we try. I usually use my check to pay the bills, and I make a decent amount of tips during the week. So I save all those tips to help pay for the daycare, for gas, and food, and trying to do something fun with the kids in the summer. I don't know how, but it works somehow at the end of the month. Little People has really helped her. They are learning their ABCs, their numbers.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And this is all before preschool. I do appreciate it a lot because I couldn't do it on my own, but they do make it very stressful. I think it's every 6 months you have to redetermine. So you have to bring all that paperwork back down into the city of Chicago. If my wages were to increase at my job, I wouldn't get help through the state anymore. You know, if you make just the certain amount of money, which may not be enough for daycare, that you wouldn't qualify. So you can't make too much money. You just have to make just enough to get by. I do have to pay now $270 a month. It used to be $79 a month, so it's gone up quite a bit. I don't even understand why it increased, and I really don't have that extra money at this point. You know, a mother like me, it really helps knowing that your child is going to a safe daycare every day while you're at work. And I would tell the state of Illinois to not cut help for childcare to families. I think it is preparing her for kindergarten. She already told me she's really excited to go to big girl school, which makes me sad because she's growing up too fast.
So that was just one of the many stories, the many families and caregivers that we spoke with in traveling around the country to learn about the experiences of parents and caregivers. So in trying to measure the cost to families, we use data from care.com to look at cost to families at childcare centers, at family childcare homes, and in-home daycare or nanny care. And what we found is that parents across the board are really struggling, that childcare is expensive in spite of poverty wages. And this is a snapshot from Massachusetts, a state that did comparatively very well in the index, but a place where parents are still struggling to make ends meet, both on the low income and high income end of the spectrum, and where caregivers still aren't making enough money to get by. So unfortunately, like, parents are struggling, and mostly low-income women and women of color have really subsidized the childcare system. So just like a couple of vignettes from our travels, in Massachusetts, we spoke with one provider who, for the last 25 years of her work first as a childcare provider and then as a teacher, has lived in public housing, has been on food stamps because her wages are not enough to support her and her daughter. And that is in one of the better states, so to speak, in the country. At the same time, in New Mexico, I spoke with a family childcare provider whom sometimes makes as little as $6.32 an hour when she cares for low-income children who are subsidized by the state. And then when Bridget traveled to Georgia, we spoke with a family that will be paying in excess of $34,000 a year when their second child is born this year. So this is not a low-income problem. This is a problem for parents. It is a problem for caregivers, and we can't continue to subsidize childcare on the backs of parents and caregivers.
We're doing a dance here. So we wanted to go through the 3 pillars of care. And Eliza, I don't know if you introduced yourself. That's Eliza Durana. She's our amazing senior policy analyst. We're delighted to be working with her. So one of the big, and not only in mapping out the infrastructure of care, what we really wanted to do was look systemically at what was working and what wasn't working, And clearly we found a system that wasn't working. And why did it matter? Why was it important? And it's important for so many reasons. I'm going to talk about quality. You know, there have been fantastic reports about how you get these great returns from investing in early care and education. The Heckman report, you get from 7 to 10 to 1 returns if you invest in early education. But that's only true if it's high quality education, high quality early care and learning. And so what is that? We really looked for good measures of quality care. We used national accreditation data, which is not the best measure, but it's really the only standardized measure that we could use. And we found that across the country, only 11% nationally of family care and family homes are accredited by national bodies. That's a really low number. Some states are moving to quality rated systems, and they're coming up with ways to try to incentivize providers to have higher quality, try to incentivize families to choose higher quality, and those are all certainly good efforts. It's very difficult. They're all very different. The standards are different, so it's hard to measure across nationally, which is why we used accreditation data. But I think the important thing to remember is the best measure of quality is the warm interaction, the responsive interaction between a caregiver or an early care and learning teacher and the child. In the 0 to 5 years, the brain is growing faster than at any other time in your life. Every second in a child's brain, 700 to 1,000 new neural connections are being made. This is a critical time for language development, for social and emotional development. And so quality care really matters. One of the main reasons why we talk a lot about economic inequality and opportunity in this country. And there's research that shows that you can map the academic achievement gap that shows up in high school. The majority of that is already present on the very first day of kindergarten. So these 0 to 5 years are critical. Quality is really critical. And we didn't find an awful lot of quality, particularly in the infant years. There's been more focus on universal pre-K, which is also a really important and good trend. But for instance, I went to Georgia, and by their own measure, they looked at the quality of infant care, which is a brave and good thing to do. So I applaud the state of Georgia for doing that. But what they found is that 70% of the licensed infant care in their state was considered low quality. So this is really an issue. One of the things that policymakers then, one of the difficulties, and a number of advocates that we talk to around the country is trying to grab policymakers' attention. And they'll say, well, we don't really want to invest in 0 to 3 because babies really should be home with their mamas, right? So we've really got not just an economic issue, we've got not just an economic inequality or academic achievement issue. You know, we've really got a cultural issue. If you look at the General Social Survey, if you look at the Pew Research, some of their surveys, we still have a lot of ambivalence in this country about whether mothers of young children should work. And yet, I think what's important to remember is that the majority of children in this country have been in what's called non-maternal care from the time they are 6 weeks old since the mid-1990s. So our structures, our laws, our policies, and even our mindsets are really fixed in an era that doesn't exist anymore. Then I'm going to talk about the last pillar of care, and that's availability. How easy is it to find care? Eliza mentioned a story that I ran into in Georgia. I'll tell you very briefly. Mickey and Jason Velmer, wonderful people. We have a 3-year-old son named Burke. Mickey, at the time that I visited with her, she was 9 months pregnant. And it was so difficult to find infant care that they had actually gone ahead and found a slot at the same spot, at the same child care center where their son is. But to preserve that spot, they had to start paying before the child was even born. And so I talked to Mickey. She was still very pregnant. She said, yeah, it was really weird. I went to pick up Burke today, and I went to sign in, and there was baby Velmer, not even born yet, and already on the enrollment system. I also spent time with a wonderful woman named Munyata Carter. She lives in Conyers, Georgia. She works in Decatur, Georgia. She works for Emory Healthcare System. She wanted to have this wonderful, high-quality on-site child care. That's where she wanted to put her kids so that they would be near her at work because her husband has a very unpredictable schedule. And then even with her employee discount, the cost of that care would have been more than she makes. So she started building concentric circles out to see where she could afford care that was also licensed and high quality, and that was 20 miles away. So she drives 15 miles from her home to drop her children off at childcare, and then another 20 to get into work. So we followed her along. If you want to see her story, it's on one of the videos on our website. It was exhausting, and she got to work on time. So what we found with availability is that there were several states in the Northeast, in particular, that had fairly high availability, but there were several in the largely rural states in the West where availability was very difficult. For instance, in South Dakota, it was one of the states that had the lowest availability. Only 1% of the child care centers there are accredited for quality, and yet South Dakota, the U.S. Census data shows, has the highest share of families where they have children under 18 and all parents are working. So those children are going somewhere. We just don't know where, and we don't know what the quality is.
So the question that we asked ourselves in compiling this data was, what do we need for this system to work? And the question is not whether we're going to do something, but how we're going to do something, because we need to address the needs of these children as they grow and develop, and also the needs of people who are providing care to them. So Bridget and I looked and came up with 4 key policy proposals that we thought addressed some of the issues that came up in the index. This is not comprehensive, but meant to be a starting point for conversation, for debate. We're happy that the campaigns, the Trump and Clinton campaigns, will be here to discuss this further after I discuss the policy proposals, and we can get their responses. But really, this is a starting point for a conversation. So the first policy that we came up with, or that we thought was really fundamental to addressing the cost, quality, and availability issues of childcare, is paid family leave. It is both a way for parents to heal, to bond, but also a way to offset the high cost of infant care that is so outrageous and that parents are not able to shoulder on their own. The majority of states and workplaces do not have paid family leave right now. So we outlined very briefly several things that should go into any paid leave plan, ideally at the federal level, but also at the state or local level. Super briefly, we want paid leave to be gender neutral so that all parents can take leave, that there are incentives for second parents as well to take leave, that it be a minimum of 3 months, that there's guaranteed job security, and that there's an income floor so that low-income workers are not penalized for doing so. The second policy proposal is cash assistance, which we thought would be a way of getting at the sticky question of how we value care that we do in our own homes. And we point to cash assistance and sort of explore ideas of a child benefit, the way that it exists in other developed countries, and also of universal basic income, as a way of defraying the cost of raising a child, of recognizing caregiving that parents do, and also getting at the issue of child poverty that's so prevalent in the US. So we are what we discuss in the policy proposal is something that is flexible, that allows parents to spend where they need, because we want to recognize the abilities of families to know what they need best, and that is independent of any sort of work requirements. The third policy proposal, which builds upon a lot of work that our education policy program has done here at New America, is universal pre-K. The price tag of quality pre-K still is a huge barrier to many families, and the decision to start school at 5 is arbitrary. So what we talk about in that proposal is how we can and should build out our public education system to match brain development for those 3 and 4-year-olds and help with the transition into higher grades. And since teachers also comparatively receive more training and higher wages than caregivers do, this is another way that we can start to address the professional development and wages that caregivers currently have. And then finally, we wanted to really recognize the experiences of dual language learners as we think about early learning infrastructure in the US. They're currently about a quarter of students or of children, of 3 and 4-year-olds. And they have really unique needs that need to be addressed, both in terms of how they access and enroll in early learning programs, and then the instruction or the teaching time that they get in the classroom. So that is our fourth proposal. And I'd now like to welcome Jonathan Cohn of Huffington Post and our 2 campaign advisors, Katie Ham and Dan Kowalski, onto the stage to discuss their policies.
Hello. See you both. I think we're going to sit down here. And first of all, before I start, as somebody who reports and writes on childcare issues and work-family issues, one of the things that hits you in the face very quickly is that this is an underpopulated issue in Washington, which may sound strange that there are any underpopulated issues in Washington, but finding good data, finding real experts on this subject who work here in Washington on policy. The people who do it are heroic, but there aren't nearly enough of them. We don't have the resources. So I actually think I want to give some applause to Bridget and Liza for this report, which is really adds meaningfully to our understanding. We'll get to more of that in a minute. But first, we have a little politics. And this is Washington. Did any of you watch the debate? No. Given this crowd, you guys probably noticed what I did. Before the fireworks started and before, all the stuff that everybody remembers, there was a quick line in Donald Trump's answer in which he was talking about his economic policies, and he kind of mentioned offhand that, he was talking to Hillary Clinton. He said, we agree on a few things, and one of them we agree on is childcare. And my antenna went up. I bet your antenna went up. Probably your antenna, yeah. Not many people outside this room, perhaps, or maybe they did, because maybe a lot of people noticed, hey, that's important. I think that was actually a watershed moment. We are well into this change, into this remarkable revolution in American society, a change in family structure, change in who is working, who is at home, how we care for children, and our society has not caught up to it. Government policy has not caught up to it. The closest we came was 1971, right? It was 1971 when Congress passed what would have been a National Child Care Act. It got vetoed, and we've sort of been not really dealing with it since then. So this is a watershed moment. The fact that we're talking about it in a presidential campaign, the fact that we have representatives from both campaigns here to talk about it. Actually, let's give them both applause for doing that too. The catch is that once you get past that line that we both care about child care, you get to some differences about what they have in mind and how they would deal with it, and parental leave, et cetera. So fortunately, they have both agreed to come here and talk a little bit about what their candidates would do. I have Dan Kowalski, who is a Deputy Policy Director at the Trump campaign, and Katie Ham, who is a volunteer surrogate for the Clinton campaign here. We actually, not to be too debate-like about this, but we flipped a coin to see who would go first. It's Dan. I'll let you decide whether that's a win or a loss. But we agreed we'd give them each a few minutes to talk about what their candidates would like to do, and then I get one follow-up question to each. So Dan, take it away.
Okay, well, Donald Trump's plan has several parts, okay? The first part is a rewrite of the tax code. Right now you have a nation where 2/3 of mothers with children under the age of 6 work. Child care for us is really a business expense. It's a cost of going to work, and we acknowledge it as that. We propose that working parents be able to deduct child care expenses from their taxes for up to 4 children, as well as for elderly dependents. The deduction would be limited to the average cost of care in the state, and it would not apply to people with high incomes. If you have married joint income over $500,000, you wouldn't be eligible for it. $250,000 for. Well, but if you look at the situation of, say, a doctor and a lawyer working in the same household, they have care costs too. And for us, there is an incentive effect caused by how you treat child care in the tax code. There is a work related effect. And that's ultimately what we want to get at. And so you can't just limit it to people who are low income, because the second earner problem applies to people with higher incomes as well as people with lower incomes. That said, the largest reductions in taxable income would go to lower and middle income families. For lower income taxpayers who wouldn't be able to benefit from a deduction, we would enhance the EITC. We would essentially allow them to deduct up to half of their payroll tax costs, and you'd get that as a rebate through the EITC. Another thing the Trump plan would do is we would allow stay-at-home parents to receive the tax deduction just as working parents do. We believe that, in recognition of that work, that's something that needs to be offered. The second part of the plan is the establishment of dependent care savings accounts, DCSAs. These will operate like health savings accounts with tax-deductible contributions and tax-free appreciation of the earnings. These accounts will help families set aside extra money to foster their children's development and offset the costs of elder care for adult dependents. For minors, the money in these accounts could be used for traditional child care, after-school enrichment, things like if you need a tutor or you want to take an SAT prep class, you could draw money from that from your DCA. And even for school tuition, I mean, you could envision a situation where you would start a DCSA at the time when you're planning a family, you put your $2,000 in. By the time if you save that money, by the time you're in high school, you might actually have money there in order to send your child to private school in some parts of the country, maybe not in Washington, D.C., but certainly in a number of places. To help lower income parents, the government would match half of the first $1,000 that a family put into their DCSA. So $500 for low-income people to kind of further their ability to save for these additional expenses of raising a family. For those who would receive the EITC bump that I had talked about earlier, they would be able on their tax form to check a box and have that deposited into their dependent care savings account, so that gets you around a little bit that problem of if you're low income, how do you come up with the money to seed the account? Well, we'll actually allow you to do that through the tax code, through the EITC mechanism. The third part of the Trump plan would address federal regulations. We feel that the current regulations favor center-based care. It appears that center-based care is a little bit, you favor center-based care in some ways, I think. But that reduces the availability of care in low-income and rural communities. There are a lot of informal arrangements out there, and we would allow states to establish their own standards for what quality care is rather than a national standard, so that legislators can determine what works in their state. For example, what works in Wyoming is different than what works in New York City and different than what works in Georgia. In New York City, your issue is how much space do you need in order to have a child care? Well, space is incredibly expensive, so that's one of the reasons why child care is incredibly expensive in New York City. In a state like Wyoming, you have a less dense population, so you really need a situation where you have more moms helping moms, and that has to be okay. And so the federal maybe that's a regulatory system that ought to be better done at the state level than the federal level. And then the marketplace would be free to develop alternatives that would provide care where it's needed at the times when people who work irregular hours need care, because that's another issue that you have. Allied with this, the Trump plan will expand an existing incentive for employers to provide on-site child care. Currently, only 7% of employers provide on-site or near-site care. In 2001, there was a bipartisan amendment to one of the reconciliation bills, actually, to allow businesses up to $150,000 tax credit for operating on-site daycares. The take-up hasn't been that good. We think the take-up hasn't been good because the amount is ultimately relatively small, and there's a 10-year recapture period on that. So if you decide that you want to close the facility, you have to be able to pony up all the benefit that you had received all at once. So we would increase the cap and shorten the recapture period and hopefully encourage more businesses in order to do on-site care, because on-site care saves time, helps employers, it's what you need. Finally, the Trump plan would provide new mothers with 6 weeks of paid maternity leave, just the mothers. The benefit would be provided through the unemployment insurance program, and it would triple the 2 weeks that on average right now new mothers get when they have a child. The benefit level would be the same as what you receive through your unemployment insurance. So it would range from like $240 in Arizona to well over $700 in Massachusetts. We believe it can be financed through the program by simply tightening up some of the money flows through the uninsurance program a little too easily. The number of people who haven't earned the benefit end up getting it, and there are ways that you should be able to tighten that up. So on the maternal care front, I mean, we advance the cause. We don't go all the way to 12 weeks, but we're moving forward in a way that for the part where we can. So that is, in a nutshell, the Trump plan.
All right. Let me ask you a lot of questions, but I'll ask you just one. So you've structured this as a tax deduction, and the classic problem with a tax deduction, as you know, as most of you know, is that it's going to be worth a lot more money to people in higher brackets. Now you cut it off at 500,000 households, but that's, last I checked, around 95th percentile of income. So you're excluding the really, really rich people, but you're getting pretty much everybody else. So that you're allowed to take half your child care costs. And the average, I think, was $9,600 for the country. So, you know, that's what, $3,000, $4,000 per child in the upper brackets that you're giving. So a family with two kids in that bracket's getting a $8,000–9,000 tax break, basically, for child care expenses. Somebody who is low income doesn't have, or lower income doesn't have an income tax liability at all, gets the EITC boost, which works out to about $1,200. So they're getting $1,200. The other family here is getting $4, $8, $12 if they have 3 kids, plus whatever they can sock away in this child care tax credit. And the cost of child care on average is $9,600 a year. So my question is, if you're going to spend, I mean, if you want to give everybody assistance, okay, you know, but if you're going to have somebody getting more, wouldn't you want to give it more to the people who face the tougher costs? I mean, how is that going to help the people at the bottom?
Well, it's going to help the people at the bottom because as a share of their income, they're going to get more back, okay? What you're talking about is an issue more with kind of like the tax rates, but the benefit, that if you look at additional income, there will be more income.
Sure, they'll get more income, but at the end of the day, their child care cost is $9,600, they're $1,200 closer,
and that's why we have established the EITC. In addition, there is the child care savings account, which would be $500 per child. That could be very substantial for families if you have 2 or 3 children. So you are indeed enriching them and providing them more resources in order to.
But you are giving a lot more help to higher income.
I'm not going to concede that. I'm going to concede.
You're not?
No. I'm going to concede. I'm going to concede that every family has problems facing the cost of raising their family. Okay? We should have a tax code that treats people fairly and equally, and we've tried to do that. Okay? We believe that it's an issue that relates to a cost of doing business. It relates to incentives. And so we're moving things in a direction that puts people on a more level playing field. We provide additional incentives that take care of your lower income people. Is it perfect? Probably not. There's probably not a policy that is perfect, but it moves you in a direction that you're not in right now.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Katie, tell us about what Hillary Clinton wants to do on child care.
Thanks so much. So I just wanted to first echo Jonathan's thanks to Bridget and Aliza and the New America Foundation for initiating this project and bringing us all here to talk about this important issue. As Jonathan said, my name is Katie Ham. I'm here on behalf of the Clinton campaign today In my day job, I'm actually the Senior Director for Early Childhood Policy at the Center for American Progress. And I'm particularly excited to be here talking about Hillary Clinton's child care vision because she was the person who introduced me to early childhood policy as a field. I brought a little prop. It's a 1993 issue of Newsweek. I was 10 when I read it, but I want to read you what they said about Hillary Clinton. They said, a policy wonk from conception, Hillary is a nationally recognized expert on children's issues, especially education and legal rights. And I think it really demonstrates 20 years later, her commitment to these issues has been steadfast. So, now I'm a parent myself. I struggle with childcare. I know that I am lucky compared to most families in the US who simply can't afford it. And so I'm excited that Secretary Clinton has brought forward a vision to comprehensively address the needs of young families with children. And I'm sure this comes as no surprise to most of you. Many of you have walked by Clinton in her fight for children and families during her time as First Lady and in the Senate. But I think it's important to just kind of review what she's said in the context of her campaign as to what she'll do as president. So first and foremost, Secretary Clinton would significantly increase our child care investments so that no family pays more than 10% of their income to child care. And I think it's really important that she has linked income and cost of child care together. So when you look at families who pay for child care, families who are living in poverty are spending more than a third of their income on child care. Families who are living on the brink of poverty, who earn between 100 and 200% of poverty, are spending 20% of their income on childcare. So what she's proposed would significantly improve the situation for low-income and middle-class working families who are struggling to pay for childcare in this country. I don't know that I need to tell this audience how childcare expenses have become very burdensome for families. I'm sure Lynette Fraga is here from Child Care Aware, so I'm sure she can talk about the great work they've done on quantifying those costs so that we could get to this place where we could talk about how to fix it. Child care is an economic necessity for families. It's something they need. It's a cost of working. But Secretary Clinton's plan also recognizes quality. Bridget had said in her opening remarks that the most important indicator of quality is that interaction between the child care worker or teacher and the child. And so Secretary Clinton has proposed the RAISE program, which stands for Respect and Increase Salaries for Early Childhood Educators. The program will support states and communities in increasing compensation and professionalization, including educational opportunities, career ladders, and professional salaries. The program is badly needed. The average salary for a child care worker is less than $10 per hour, and that's undermining the quality that we're able to provide. Secretary Clinton has met with child care workers in Chicago last year and across the country and heard from them that when they are making poverty wages, that undermines their ability to provide that nurturing care that they need because they're worried about how they're going to feed their own children. So I think it's important that we prioritize the workforce in the context of quality early learning and childcare. As a seasoned policymaker, Clinton is also committed to building on successful programs. She would double the Early Head Start program, which serves young children under 3 in high-quality early learning and childcare programs. She'd also double home visiting. We talked about kind of the first few weeks, when first-time parents are kind of bringing a child home and figuring out their new role as parents. What home visiting does is gives them a nurse or a parent educator who supports them in that role. As First Lady of Arkansas, Secretary Clinton brought HIPPY, which is Home Instruction for Preschool Youngsters, to the US from Israel. Today, it is one of the evidence-based programs that's funded by HHS. As senator, she supported legislation to expand home visiting, and so as president, she's going to expand that to 2 million parents and children over the next 10 years. She's supported universal preschool for all 4-year-olds. That's something she also supported in the Senate. She has a paid family and medical leave program that supports both mothers and fathers following the birth of a child. It also supports workers who are themselves ill or need to care for an ill family member. I can speak from personal experience. I had a baby about a year ago. I was recovering from a C-section. I needed my partner there. This program has to cover moms and dads. It can't be a maternity leave program where it doesn't work. But Secretary Clinton has supported 12 weeks paid leave for families. And so finally, I wanted to just talk about a particular group of parents that Secretary Clinton has really elevated, and that's student parents. 1 in 4 college students in the US is a parent. These are people who are trying to better their lives for themselves and their children, and childcare is a huge impediment to doing that. We shouldn't have families out there who can't improve their economic situation because they can't afford to go to school. So what Secretary Clinton has proposed is called SPARK, Student Parents in America Raising Kids. The program will award scholarships to 1 million parents who are struggling to afford childcare as they attend school. It'll also increase the capacity of on-campus childcare to reach an additional 250,000 children. So together, I think what Secretary Clinton has outlined is really a comprehensive approach to help young families and children. The policies will put childcare and preschool within reach for working families, reduce their cost burden, and support them in promoting their own family's economic well-being. And ultimately, they'll improve our economy. So again, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk about Secretary Clinton's vision. I mentioned that I have a 1-year-old, and when I think about his age cohort and I think about the opportunity that we're sitting on, I can't help but think it's similar to where we were in 1971, and I really hope we have the opportunity to capitalize on that. So thank you so much.
So I want to talk about this 10% guarantee. I remember when Hillary Clinton announced that, a lot of us wrote about it. It was a big deal. That was a very bold pledge. And I remember saying, okay, that's really interesting. How are you going to do that? Yeah. And the answer was, well, we're going to get the details out to you. And that was a couple months ago. And I can tell you as someone who has called the campaign since then, I've said, all right, how are you going to do this? And it's always, well, you know, we'll get to it. Catherine Rampell of the Washington Post had a column, I think 2 weeks ago, saying, hey, where's the plan? No details. First of all, do you have more details? You may, I don't know if you do, but if you don't, you know, we can say what you will about the Trump plan, but he did give us, gave us some detail, you know, at least on the tax levels. So what can you tell us about how you would get to this 10%?
Sure. So I guess I would say, I mean, I think I did talk a lot about the details of the plan, and I think the campaign has put out details about how she would build on existing programs and how she would set this ambitious goal of no family paying more than 10%. You know, Secretary Clinton has been in Washington before. She is a seasoned policymaker. She understands the value of setting an ambitious goal and then working with stakeholders to achieve that goal. There's a lot of back and forth that's going to have to go on for this to happen. And so providing an outline of what you want to do and a roadmap to get there that leaves room for others to weigh in, for folks on the Hill to weigh in, for other policymakers to weigh in, I think is a smart approach.
Okay, but to be fair, I mean, I know Hillary Clinton's campaign agenda. I can look on her healthcare agenda, I can look at other parts, and there's more detail than there is on the child care in terms of how to get there. Can you give us any more, you know, I mean, there's tax credits, there's subsidized child care. Without, you know, it doesn't have to be level, you know, we're going to do 50% of this or whatever, but I mean, can you paint a picture for me of what this program roughly looks like?
The campaign has said that they would increase tax credits and child care subsidies to get to the 10%. The details of, you know, income cutoffs for who does what, I think are something that is in development. But I think we have kind of a lot of tools out there for getting there. And so what I focus on, what I think is important, is that 10% cap.
And do we have any sense of like size, like cost of this?
So there are independent analyses out there from the Center for the Responsible Budget, and they've said $200 billion over 10. The campaign has not released a cost figure.
Okay. Well, thank you both. I think are you guys both hanging around?
Yeah.
So you know, more chance to ask them questions. Please do. Ask them lots of questions. But we're gonna shift the stage here. Thank you both. Appreciate it. And if our panelists could come on up, our second panel, second act of this show. I'm there. Oh, right. I'm on the right side. I'm on the right side. Yes, yes, yes.
On a rainy morning, look at all you. That's great.
Alrighty. Well, this is the second half of our panel, which will not be about the debate or the Trump or Clinton plans. Instead, we're going to talk about the report and the state of childcare in America and what we can be doing about it. And we have an excellent panel here. Let's see. We didn't sit everyone in order. We're gonna mix up the order, but I'll give you a quick, very brief introduction of everybody, and then I'm just going to start right into some questions. All the way on my left is Lynette Fraga, who is the Executive Director of Childcare Aware of America, which, if you don't know the group, is the sort of one of the best known, not best known nonprofits advocating in this space, doing research in this space. Terrifically, you come by your experience as someone who's been on the front lines before. 20 years of experience as an educator, program director, and actually spent a lot of time in the U.S. military child care system, which you guys probably know, but people always give me that funny look when I say, you know, some of the best child care in America is on a military base. They go, what? But it's true, and you can talk about that. Sheila Lirio-Marcello, right over here, is the chairwoman and CEO of Care.com, which is responsible for the report today and backing it, but also the world's largest online platform for finding and managing family care, serving more than 20 million members in 18 different countries, which I didn't know. You guys are all over the place. And you have been named one of the top 10 women entrepreneurs by Fortune magazine. Eric Peterson, I guess you figured out which one I can figure out which one Eric is. He's a partner at A.T. Kearney and managing director at A.T. Kearney's Global Business Policy. Before that was at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And before that, director of research at Kissinger Associates. Aijen Pu over here is co-director of Caring Across Generations and director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Has been working on the rights of caregivers for 20 years? More than 20 years. 20 years, more than 20 years. Roughly 20 years.
Roughly 20 years. She started when she was 15.
Started when she was 15. She's a recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Genius Fellowship and was named by Fortune as one of the world's 50 greatest leaders, making me feel very inferior for not having been named anything by Fortune magazine on this panel. And finally over here I have, well, you guys know, this is Anne-Marie Slaughter. Heather, thank you for letting us use your house for this. President of CEO of New America. If you don't know her as President of CEO in New America, you know her as former State Department official. If you don't know her as that, you know her as the former dean of the Woodrow Wilson School. And if you don't know her as that, you probably know her as the one who wrote the Atlantic article, Why Women Still Can't Have It All, because it is still the most read article ever, I believe, at the Atlanta Monthly. So what a great panel. I'm so excited you guys are here. Lynette, I'm going to start with you. I was talking before how little information there is in this space and how little infrastructure. You guys do a report. It's one of the few ones out there on the cost of childcare. And their Economic Policy Institute has done a report. There's a handful of others out there. This new report, tell me what this tells us, what this gives us that we didn't have before.
Yes, so first let me say thank you, not only for inviting me to participate in the panel, but importantly to have this great conversation about the importance of childcare. And this new report is certainly a contribution to some of the information that we've been wanting to share and collect for over a decade. So we do author at Childcare Aware of America the Parents and the High Cost of Childcare report. And we've been able to collect information about how cost can be such a challenge for children and families across the country. This report, and as was mentioned earlier, it's tough to collect that data. This report is a wonderful contribution because as we look at the diversity and complexity of childcare, children are sitting in many different settings, including center-based care, family child care, kith and kin care, relative care, and often care that we can't capture or don't even know where children are at, which was mentioned a little earlier by Bridget. So this report importantly also captures in-home care and care provided by nannies, for example, and I think that's a real contribution to really understand the landscape of where particularly our youngest children are across the country.
Sheila, the care economy is massive. It is huge. I think people don't even have a kind of sense of how big it is. Tell me about the economy. Tell me about this economy. Why is it so big? And I mean, are we talking about making it bigger? I mean, what's the rationale? I mean, we're already putting so much financial resources, if you want to talk about it that way.
Yeah, you know, the size of the care industry as we measure it between child care and senior care, and IBIS puts this out every year, and they just updated, is about $280 billion is the size of our legal industry and the gambling industry. And we know we're a very litigious society. But yet you hear from Bridget and Lisa in this wonderful report that it's not even enough to cover. And so many families, and we look at the result of every state not achieving any of the 3 key criteria in the index. So the problem is actually both the demand side of care and the supply side of care. And so on the demand, we've heard from Lynette and Bridget the cost of care. It's close to $10,000. It's, you know, from a median family, it's about a fifth, and it's 2/3 of low-income minimum wage earners. I mean, it is so expensive, and yet I'm quoting the $280 billion. And it's growing in demand. Care happens to be the fastest job category in terms of growth, right? So because automation, machine learning, data science, a lot of the jobs are predicted to go away, but care jobs are here to stay. And so, in fact, our society is going to be dependent on that income and dependent on, let me move now to supply, right? On the supply side of care, and you're going to hear, on average, somebody quoted less than $10, about $9 on average, but yet we pay our golf caddies $17 an hour. And there's a serious problem on the supply. So as demand increases, how are we thinking about supporting the caregivers? And you're seeing it in the report. A family that's interviewed in one of the states is just barely able to make it meet to pay for her own care so that she can care for other families. So there's a real fundamental problem that we have, of a growing problem if we even just economically size it. And it's interesting of you pushing to really understand what's the plan. Is it $200 billion of that report that was quoted that the campaign on Hillary's side hasn't quoted yet? We have got to invest more in care. And the policy work, and I think it's a start, as Elisa mentioned, is something that's critical and it's important, and it has to be the entire care infrastructure of where we invest, and it has to be specific plans all the way throughout.
Jen, I actually want to follow you on this, because we were just hearing about how this mismatch where we already spend a lot of money on caregiving, and yet the people who provide the caregiving are often the ones at the bottom of the income ladder. These are the people you represent and advocate for. Tell me a little bit about, I mean, what does it mean for these families, and also is it more than just money that they need? I mean, in terms of pay, I mean, what?
Absolutely. So we have a situation where the workforce that we're counting on to care for our children, the most precious elements of our lives, can't even care for their own children and their families on the wages that they earn. And there's no economic security, very little in the way of training, no access to benefits. I mean, it's a some of the most important work is some of the most vulnerable and economically insecure work in our economy today. And I think it's a real reflection not just of how we've undervalued the professional workforce, but how we've really undervalued care, whether it's paid or unpaid. I mean, the root of it is the way that we've just taken for granted work that goes into raising families. And, you know, in the professional context, it's largely been women of color and immigrant women, many of whom are undocumented, who've done this as a profession. And the layers of vulnerability are also codified by law. Some of you may know this already, but there's a long history of exclusion from some of the most basic labor protections of this workforce. And that's something that we've been working state by state.
What's an example of like some of the ones that are?
Oh, so
Just one
most of the labor laws that were part of the New Deal, that are kind of the foundation of our nation's labor policy, like the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act, actually excluded from the outset domestic workers and also farm workers. And there's a connection there to the legacy of slavery. But we've essentially, people who've done in-home family care in a domestic setting as a profession have essentially been excluded from some of those really core protections. And over the years, we've worked really hard to change and address those exclusions. And in the state of Illinois, it was great to see actually the data from Illinois, Illinois became the most recent state, the 7th state, to pass a Domestic Worker Bill of Rights that actually offers protections for nannies, equal protection under the labor law for nannies for the first time. But there are many of these gaps in the protections that is really a reflection of how we've not really seen this work as real work and not treated it as a profession. And what that's led to is a really unsustainable environment. We lose some of our best caregivers to other low-wage professions, which is really a shame. And we can't sustain people in this work over time, people who want to be career caregivers and honestly really value and love the work that they do, really struggle to sustain in it. And it doesn't work for families, doesn't work for the workforce.
And Marie, I want to go to you next. And how, to put this in the context of the women's movement for us, but I mean, in particular, how much of this problem we're just talking about here and the treatment of caregivers, treatment of care, how much of that is because society, particularly in Washington, has said this is a women's issue, and women's issues don't get the same kind of treatment in Washington as non-women's issues?
That's a huge part of the answer. And indeed, one of the things that I think is most important about this report, about care.com, about the work that iGen does and the work all three of us are doing in a campaign called Who Cares, we're not talking about women this morning. We're talking about care. We're not talking about this problem that women who want to work have to deal with. We're talking about economic value. We're talking about valuing care, creating economic value, both because it is already a big sector of the economy, but also because these are jobs that we need for those of us who think about the future of jobs. So we're talking about it as an economic issue. We're talking about it as a social issue. It's actually also a security issue. The reason the Pentagon, or the major reason they're so good at this, is they're worried that we will not have a generation of children who will be able to operate the weapons and do the work necessary to keep us safe. Now, that's hardly the only reason to invest in care, but the point is to think about this as care issues, not as women's issues, is critical. And the simple reason we don't value care is that care is traditional women's work and breadwinning is traditional men's work. And as women become completely equal, then we need to say, as honestly, if you imagine if women had run the world from the beginning, we would not be having this conversation. We would, of course, all recognize that investing in the next generation and caring for those who are at the end of their lives and caring for the sick and the disabled at any point is as important as earning an income. And so we're moving to a world in which we have to think about men and women both as breadwinners and caregivers and valuing that equally as necessary to a happy, healthy life, but also necessary to the productivity of an economy, to the security of a nation, and to the equality of a nation. So the last thing I would say is, this point about the first 5 years that Bridget and Eliza made so powerfully, the biggest political issue in this country right now is inequality. And investing in children in the first 5 years is the single best way Republicans and Democrats can get to giving kids really their best possible start and their best chance to reach their potential.
Eric, I think you're our designated representative of corporate America here.
All of corporate America.
Not to mention all men.
All men, all corporate. Man, that's a tough job. You got a lot of hats to wear today. Tell me from the standpoint of corporate America, make the business case for more investment in early childhood and child care and care in general.
Yeah, care in general, writ large, is a strategic issue. And it's shocking to me that we would even have to make that point. Now, you mentioned that we reached a threshold earlier. And what's striking to me is that it's been so obvious for so long how critical this care industry is writ large. And that's why I'd like to echo congratulations to New America for doing this important report. Let's look at it for a minute from a hardcore business perspective. Level of productivity falls as a result of many of the shortcomings that are highlighted in the report. The whole issue of work continuity is another core factor in terms of a hardcore business argument that is certainly exacerbated by the trends that we've talked about. What about the future competitiveness, building on what Anne Marie has said? The future competitiveness of the country. Where is our labor pipeline? And how will they be able to run the machines or do the innovation in a world in which we're seeing a fundamental shift with respect to future production? Then add to that the whole issue of diversity and how important, how critical that is to helping us reach new levels of productivity. When you wrap all these elements together, I think you have an ironclad argument that we're dealing here, ladies and gentlemen, with an authentically strategic issue. Now, let me repeat what was said earlier. It's also shocking to me in an age of big data and this massive, massive data accumulation and analytical framework that we're doing now, with a few critical exceptions, of course, that we don't know more about the impact of this in many critical ways. And so I think this important report helps us in that regard as well. So now I think it's incumbent for us to say, all right, so what? And what is the role of the private sector in this? And what can and should we be doing? So let me speak on behalf of the private sector. But little footnote here, A.T. Kearney is an international management consulting firm, and I have partners and colleagues represented here. We feel very strongly about this, but I think we all need to begin with the notion that there is no silver bullet now in terms of what can and should be done. But a lot of these have been coming into the press of late, and I'm glad to see the discussion of the respective campaigns. Flexible work schedules, child care assistance, child care on-site hosting, determined efforts to define higher, more strategically determined areas of public-private sector partnerships where we have a clearer definition of respective roles. I think are a good starting point. But there's a huge caveat here as we think about care across sectors, across size of business, across time, when we have different generational combinations in the US and elsewhere in the world. I think we need to be looking at a differentiated or asymmetric set of solutions, going back to the no one size fits all. So I hope that what we can do in business, a tumultuous business environment to be sure, the complexities are off the chart. But nevertheless, we need to recognize a key variable with respect to our capacity to maneuver in the future, and that is precisely what we're here to talk about, care.
Let's talk about where we are in this conversation. We are in Washington. Let's talk for a second about where we are in this conversation now. And I'm going to start with you, Lynette, but you guys jump in when you want. So we have two campaigns here, right? You know, it's in the debate. We're hearing about childcare, this report. But how far along are we? I mean, it's very hard to imagine Congress doing anything big right now. I mean, do you feel like there's, clearly there's momentum. How much momentum? Where are we? What's it going to take to kind of get this to the place where there's actual legislation?
The fact that we have so much energy in this room alone, but across the country, folks are talking about the importance of childcare. When there are statistics that are put out there that the cost of childcare rivals the cost of college tuition, that it rivals the cost of mortgage and rent and transportation and food, this really hits people strongly on the cost issue. But I want to also say, Anne Marie, you mentioned the quality piece and how critically important what we know about when children are learning so much during the first 5 years of life is such another critical lever for change. We have to ensure that for our future workforce that we are focusing on the critical earliest years, and children are in childcare. Also, knowing that teachers of young children, the respect that they need for the hard work that they're doing every day, and the amplification of, wow, 3 things are happening here. We have really, really important individuals in children's lives that make such a long-standing difference, that we have costs that parents are struggling with, and that we know so much about early learning. All of those pieces coming together, I think, has created a momentum. I think it's created a movement. And this movement around ensuring that care happens, I think, has obviously made its way to the presidential debates. It's made its way to the presidential campaigns, and I would argue at the state and local level as well. Now it's a matter of what do we do about it. And we have to embrace that complexity. It's really tough. We have seen success over the years. We take that success and we want to make sure we build on that success. The Child Care Development Block Grant, which was signed into law in 2014, something that many of us in this room and across the country fought for to
But not a lot of
ensure.
people know about, so
I'll share a little bit
the
about sort of what a soundbite
Yeah.
about why that's important. I would say probably at the highest level, what this did for child cares is ensure that we are again on folks' minds, and that health and safety is part of a key puzzle. And every parent should feel that their child is healthy and safe in the environments they put their children in. So again, it amplified the issue. But we have so much more work to do. There's a level of investment and solutions that have to be generated. That's all of our issue.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Anne Marie mentioned the Who Cares campaign in this movement. We certainly have discussed this as a very long-term investment. One of the reasons we were so excited about this collaboration is that data-driven analysis to show the problem, right, is critical and important. And of course, what New America added to it was the real stories, the people behind the data, and bringing that together. And why is data so important? It's because we're able to say to businesses that this is a problem, right? We need to be able to, so that they can actually measure it and see that the impact that it's having on their employees' productivity, because as an entire system, it's not working. So now, if we go back to Jonathan's question, it's a long-term investment. I think this data has to continually be, researched. We report on progress. You create transparency and accountability for every state on the data, so that people are put on the hook on cost, quality, and availability measurements, and that the fact that no state is achieving all three. I mean, this is really critical and important. So, but I see this as a long-term investment that we need to make, that yes, we need to act now. And I think of all the momentum, at least I'm hearing, is that paid leave specifically could be the Trojan horse of getting awareness both in the business mindset of the private sector, really voting this in, both parties having an approach toward paid leave. Obviously, one is just maternity, and we believe it should be both. Paid paternity and maternity is just paid family leave. But the fact that both parties, I mean, this is a watershed event. Please build on it. It's like we're so excited to see that movement, because the way we think about it is that is part of the care infrastructure. Paid leave could be a start that then leads to more tax credits and other movements that need to happen in the investment in the care infrastructure.
May I emphatically agree with that, number one. And number two, say that we need to be working much more actively in asking what-if questions. What if we had fuller participation of women in the workforce if we were to follow some of these routes? You all may have seen the IMF study, which suggested that we could see a rise on the order of 5% of US GDP. Remarkable. So if we're thinking about the stakes that are associated with these issues, building on exactly what Sheila has said, I think that there is a very concrete case that can and should be made at this moment.
Okay, but well, let me, because I actually want to have a question for you. This leads to a question for you, which is, there's a tension here, and so I'm going to be the complicated guy to sort of point this out, which is that we're all sitting here saying, wow, this is a great investment, we need to do this, we need to help people. The problem is it's very childcare, and I want to focus this on childcare. It's already very expensive for people. They can't afford it. We need to help people. And oh, by the way, the quality isn't very good. We need to improve the quality. Well, guess what? Almost anything you do to improve the quality of childcare is going to make it more expensive. So right off the bat, you're making a bad problem worse. how do you deal, paying caregivers more? There's a ton of reasons why that might make sense, but that's going to send the cost skyrocketing. So how do you, I'm sure you deal with this argument. So and then yes.
Yeah. I think we need to think about it like we think about investments in infrastructure. I mean, if we think about what enables the economy to function, roads, transportation systems, waterways, internet, all of these pieces are part of an infrastructure that makes everything else possible. And that is what care does. Family care is the work that makes everything else possible. It makes it possible for each of us to go out into the workforce and do what we do in the economy that makes us competitive, that creates all kinds of growth and wealth. And so what we have right now is an infrastructure that we haven't invested in, patchwork at best. And what that's created is actually incredibly inefficient and costly ways that we are currently handling care. It is already really expensive. If we actually systematically and intentionally invested in a care infrastructure that allowed for working families to manage and provide care for children actually throughout the entire lifespan. I mean, what we're talking about is a 21st century care infrastructure that includes support around childcare, elder care, paid leave, everything we need to work and care for our families too in this moment, in this day and age. It requires an investment, but ultimately I think what we see on the back end is new efficiencies, better quality of life, more productivity in the workplace. And these are the things that we can now start to measure with tools like the Care Index. So I agree that the price tag is significant, but we actually have to think about it as a down payment on a better future and a much more efficient future for everyone. And some of the things that we talk about are, for example, in Maine and Michigan, we're launching campaigns for what we call universal family care, which is essentially a cash benefit that will help families afford childcare, paid leave, and elder care. So we're trying that in states. We agree that affordability is a challenge, and we think we have to come together as the private sector, as government, and as families to actually create the systems to make it all work better.
And you have to join the conversation about care with the conversation about the future of work.
Right.
This is a bigger set of issues. So on Friday, I will spend all day at the Shift Commission, which is a project that New America and Bloomberg Beta are doing on the future of work, workers, and technology. And there are Senator Mark Warner's looking at the future of work, portable benefits. New America's mission is renewing America in the digital age. We are in the digital revolution about 1830. In the first industrial revolution. In other words, steam engines had been invented and we had railroads, but really the changes, the huge changes of that revolution were still to come. And so we're looking at where are the jobs going to come from in this country? You read The Rise of the Robots, you think about truck driving is the largest job category in any number of states, and we're now talking about self-driving trucks in 5 years. So the way to think about how to afford this is we need these jobs. And if you recognize that care is a foundation for work, or family is a foundation for work, just like work is a foundation for family. You can't raise a family without work, but you also can't work without a care system for your family. It's not possible. So building that infrastructure isn't, again, it's not a women's issue. It's not even just a care issue, it's an economic issue and a political issue, because where else are the jobs? It's a big piece of where the jobs are going to come from.
And can I just add one last thing, which is that if we think about even from an electoral standpoint, the millennial generation, the largest generation in history, is starting to turn 35. And 4 million children are born per year. And they're an incredibly powerful electoral defining generation.
Not the 4 million children, but the
The
millennials.
millennial generation and the 4 million children someday.
Eventually.
Eventually. And then the boomers are starting to turn 70 and also living longer than ever. And dealing with managing their own caregiving for their parents and also preparing for their own care. So everyone, and especially the largest, most significant electoral kind of constituencies within our electorate right now, are dealing front and center with care issues and looking for solutions. So this is something that, whether it's from a kind of practical policy standpoint, everyone is dealing with this, and I think that's part of why we're seeing the rise in terms of the conversation.
Yeah.
So often care is described as a soft issue. You're hearing from everybody in the panel the passion that we have, right? But if you think about it, early childhood, 90% brain development between 0 to 4. And education, as we know, and the argument's already been made that it drives competitiveness of our country. Then you just heard Anne-Marie say, like, now let's talk about jobs. The jobs are going to go away, but care jobs are here to stay. But you also need care jobs because there's this codependency between care and work. You got to work to have great care, and you need care to work. So now it impacts this middle part of society about working. Now then there's end of life. What's causing our deficit? What's the largest driver of healthcare costs? It's those readmission rates at end of life. And if you don't have great care, and AARP's put out this study that people want to age in place, if you don't have great care infrastructure at the end of life, what does that happen to the costs, our budget, who's taking care of us? So if you think about the entire life cycle of everything care touches, how can you even describe it as a soft issue? It is an economic issue. It impacts all genders. It impacts all parts of our society, all the way from those at work, those that are undervalued who stay at home, and that includes caregivers who are trying to be professional and are underpaid. That's all parts of our society. So this is something that you can hear, the passion that we have in making the economic argument, measurable indexes, a great report, making it real for people with real stories, and millennials and boomers can make an impact to really, as Aijen said, to vote and to really care about this issue, no pun intended.
I think we're going to go to questions in a minute or two, but I'll do two more quick questions. I don't know who this might be for you, Eric, but might be for someone else. You mentioned you have your global company.
Yes.
So you have employees in other countries where they do things a little differently. Do people ever talk about that? Like, hey, what's going on with you guys in the United States that you don't, or what?
Just
Does
cover,
it ever happen like
just
that?
cover rest of world, Eric.
Yeah.
Look, without belaboring the fact, there are a number of other systems that I think it would be useful for us to look at very, very carefully indeed. The reality is, building on the lifetime care argument that Sheila has just put forward, the reality is that we are in a positive demographic situation relative to other countries that are now depopulating across the world. So the aging overhang for them is even more significant than the one that we need to be covering for in this country. We have a lot of new and what we hope would be productive assets coming into the labor pipeline in order to propel into the future this steady demographic growth that differentiates the United States from many of our industrial country competitors. This is really significant in our view. That's point one. Point number two is that we are seeing across Europe now, for example, a number of very interesting policies that either shadow or maybe variations of some of the suggestions in this valuable report. And I think we need to measure what we do not only in terms of across states here, but how we stack up relative to other industrialized countries. So that might be a next step for us. I know that we're looking at end-of-life issues as well in this broader care inquiry, but that would be a significant issue.
I'm going to give Lynette the last word on this, and I think we'll go to questions.
So as we're looking at the global child care, for example, and early childhood education, there's certainly examples to look at. And yes, I think people are asking the question. And we have some really important things we should highlight and spotlight that are happening here in the United States that are supporting quality early childhood programs, early Head Start and Head Start programs, that we do have states that are doing spotlight, highlight level issues around focused on quality childcare. Mentioned earlier military childcare. Are we looking at the military childcare system and how they've brought all of these issues to bear? The fact that it's a workforce support, the fact that it's an economic engine, the fact that it's a future workforce support, the fact that we know so much happens in the earliest years. How are we focusing on what we know and applying it? Everything from child development, respecting teachers, teacher wages, systems of care, early Head Start, child outcomes, and an international equation, and collecting all of that information so we can create an infrastructure and invest in what we already know, which I think is a lot.
Oh, great. I think we're going to do audience questions now, I think. Do we have a microphone? We have a microphone. Awesome. All right. Hold your hand up, and please introduce yourself, and please actually ask a question.
Okay. Hi. My name is Sonia Michelle. I wrote what I think is one of the first histories of childcare or no childcare in the United States. It's called Children's Interest, Mothers' Rights, the Shaping of America's Childcare Policy. It was published in 1999, so it's a little dated, but there's still some interesting stuff in it if you're interested. Two questions. There are many elephants in the room, but one of them is immigration. I think Ai-jen Poo and other people on the panel know that a lot of the child care workers, especially the ones who do private child nanny work, are immigrants. Many of them are undocumented, and as a result of that, because of the lack of coverage in the labor laws, and also because of the fact that they're undocumented, they can't always access whatever protections there are. In other words, they're subsidizing our child care as well. So I just wonder what reaction the panel has to that. And the second is this question of whether or not subsidies or cash benefits should be given to everybody, whether or not they use child care or not. Dan Kowalski suggested, it seemed to be a contradiction. On the one hand, he was talking about tax breaks for child care because child care is a cost of doing business. But on the other hand, he also said that the Trump campaign supports cash benefits to everybody, whether they stay home or not. So I just wonder, given the expense of giving a cash benefit to everybody, including stay-at-home moms who are not necessarily being productive or contributing to the economy, whether that makes sense economically. Thank you.
Those are two really good questions. Why don't we do the immigration question first, and then the second one about, and if Dan wants to address it too. But let's do the immigration question first. Sure. Two questions. Everyone else, one question, but those are two really good questions, so that's okay.
On the immigration front, there's no doubt that the immigrant caregiving workforce is going to be a huge part of the solution for the future. And I think one of the symptoms or manifestations of what it means when you undervalue care and you have essentially large parts of the care economy happening in the shadows is that you have also this dynamic where this huge portion of the workforce is also operating in a double shadow environment, the undocumented workforce. Actually, 2/3 of all undocumented people in this country are women and children. And the majority of the working age women are working in the care economy. And so they're already a part of the solution. We're just not able to bring them into the full light of the economy to really put them onto career pathways of professionalization and training and securing this workforce that we need for the future. So I think immigration reform is a huge part of the care economy solution and infrastructure down the road, and we really do need to invest in the immigrant caregiving workforce. And I think what that means is also investing in their families and their ability to care for their children. So we're all interconnected here, and the care economy is the place where all of that becomes so clear. And thanks for raising that point.
Let's talk about at home and Dan, you were invoked, so.
Our position is essentially that all families make sacrifices in order to raise their children, okay? There are additional costs that are incurred by going out to work, and you have to pay somebody to take care of care. But on the other hand, if you choose to stay home, you're making a conscious decision in order to make do with less. And it's work too. It's work that's valued. It's work that, because of some of the work that these people are doing here, we are able to impute what the value of that is, and why shouldn't we benefit it? I mean, essentially, right now you're saying that the only care that matters is care that's being provided outside of the home. We reject that. We basically believe the care given inside the home by the mother is valuable and rewarded and should be, if not encouraged, at least held neutral compared to other forms. Pardon? The father too, or is it only the mother saying that? No, it's whichever parent chooses. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Yeah.
Good morning, I'm Valerie Young with the Caring Economy Campaign. I have 3 really good questions, but I'm only going to ask one.
Okay.
Good for you. At the very end of the conversation, you started talking about how the U.S. compared with other countries. I've worked in both child care and paid family leave for a long time. Recently, in the paid family leave context, all of a sudden people are talking about how the U.S. compares with other countries, and that's really given some lift to the movement. There is some really great data about how the U.S. compares with other countries by the Caring Economy Campaign called Social Wealth Economic Indicators. Do you think injecting that sort of, the U.S. invests less than half as a percentage of GDP as other modern economies, is now the time in the child care context to really push that information, and will it move the argument forward like it has in the paid family leave context?
Oh, good question. Who wants that?
I'll take a quick crack, and you know much more about this than I do. I'll just say, shout out to the Caring Economy Campaign. I see your efforts to focus on what we measure, the social indicators. That is going to be a very important part of this. And it again fits into a larger movement. In my former life as dean of the Woodrow Wilson School, Danny Kahneman, the Nobel laureate in economics, has been pushing with Alan Kruger at measuring happiness, right? Why GDP was not handed down, to Moses, right? It is a human creation of what we measure. And in my lifetime, it used to be GNP, gross national product, and then it became gross domestic product. So what we measure and what we value is, again, malleable. Those are human decisions and they're policy decisions, and this is a very important, larger piece of this puzzle.
And my response would be absolutely yes. I think that all data and all points of comparison and all inputs can be really helpful as we struggle with such a complex issue. So I think amplifying again more what's happening globally as well as what's happening stateside is going to be so critically helpful to populate reports that we're talking about this afternoon. So I think it is important for us to discuss an international, having an international conversation, for sure.
Dan wanted to jump. Eric, sorry.
May I make a quick point here, just building on that? You're watching, to be sure, the data coming out of the OECD. We have data on education, the PISA scores, a range of other, in health, et cetera, et cetera. And what we've been picking up in our Global Business Policy Council is that both in absolute and in per capita terms, investment in the US often doesn't lead to the same effect as it does in other countries. So I would argue that it's not only a function of the absolute numbers, whether expressed as GDP or some other measure, but we need to be thinking about bang for the buck as well. And I'd like to come back to a point that was raised, I think, by a couple of my colleagues here, that we really need to think about integrating this with education, with workforce, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we need an integrated framework in order to make these scores even more meaningful than they are.
Having this wonderful panel and report. My name is Beth Rosen. I'm here with the World Bank Group. And I just want to say again how exhilarated we are to have this. We felt very fortunate to be able to have some conversations with Care.com and New America along the way. And when we came out with our new gender strategy this last year, we did consultations in more than 20 countries around the world, and there was one issue that came up in, I think, every single country, whether it was government, civil society, or just the person who happened to be sitting across the table and had to leave early to pick their child up from a center that closed early that day, and that was the care economy. And so that's why we've been doing impact evaluations that are focusing on the actual results. Our colleagues from the IFC are here looking at the business case that you were talking about. We're looking at the policy environment, and so it's just so exciting to be a part of this. Without any further ado, so my question is, how do you all see this as relating to what's really been shifting in the U.S. workforce, in particular, the so-called Uberization of the workforce, where on the one hand there's a lot of increased flexibility, but on the other hand that comes without a lot of the benefits. So you don't necessarily have the paid leave, the subsidized health care, and those sorts of things. We see that even within our own institution, where we're relying more and more on consultants. And it seems to be an across-the-board phenomenon, which would impact as we move forward in this brave new world. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Happy to answer that one. It's really interesting, and one of the things I feel very fortunate in a sense is riding off of Uber's success, of their emphasis and getting a lot of attention of, there are 1.5 million drivers, whereas on our platform there are 8 million caregivers. And the original set of gig workers, if you think about it, were caregivers. We've had caregivers for a very long time, even before Uber or Lyft's existence. And this conversation has been ongoing about what's the social net for the flexible workforce. And the way we think about it is, as we continue to work on the Who Cares campaign, support measurements like the Care Index that can impact policy and change, like paid leave, like cash assistance, like universal pre-K, and the things that the report's recommending. At the same time, what can we do as a private sector in terms of overall accountability? And signing things like the Good Work Code that NDWA put out, and what is it that we're doing to really support our employee group. And I say our employee group because the reality is we're marketplaces trying to empower the efficiency of peer-to-peer businesses online to go offline. And so what are we doing? And our employee means as a household. We are employing these caregivers, but how does 20 families support one housekeeper? So at Care.com, we've been trying to figure out how do we innovate, and we're not alone. We're talking to a lot of the other gig companies. So for example, we partnered with Stride Health. And they're wonderful, and they're now providing, they're part of the Shift Commission too, in that conversation around providing health and dental, vision, soon to be disability, access to the caregivers on the marketplace. We launched Care.com Benefits, right, which is the benefit bucks. We're trying to figure out, and it's equivalent to 6 months of pharmacy and vision as a private sector, and asking families to contribute. Because now you're having 20 families, true pooled, portable benefits that take care of a specific caregiver working for 20 families. And so they're private sector solutions, and we're not alone. Etsy, a lot of other companies are starting to really brainstorm how we can make a difference here. But it's also pursuing the investment in data, partnering with nonprofits, partnering with think tanks, with the government, because it will take a village for us to solve this care infrastructure that Ajahn described.
Just to quickly add on to that, I think Anne-Marie really beautifully described the stage we're in the digital revolution, and there's a lot of implications in terms of work and security, stability, and I do think we are now in a conversation about what are going to be the seeds of the next social contract, one that is reflective of this globalized and highly tech-driven economy. And so ideas like universal basic income and portable benefits and universal family care, these are all helping to create a new landscape of conversation about what is the new framework of public policy that working people in the 21st century need in order to work and live well. And that conversation absolutely connects to this conversation because care has to be front and center in that conversation.
I think we have a question back there.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I'm from Maths and Services Group. I've taught on both the south and west sides of Chicago in daycares. And one of the biggest issues my colleagues and I faced was that before we could even provide quality care in the classroom, we were constantly being pulled out to deal with all the different nuances of funding streams and paperwork. So I was wondering what you think we could do to address that issue so that we can actually get to the quality teaching. Thank you.
I'll start and then please. So as a former infant toddler teacher, I feel you. And I know that what we want to do as teachers is be with children and do that which we do so well, which is build those quality relationships with children and families. And there is this struggle, and it's actually very interesting because it's very similar to what I would call sort of the back office, kind of really important pieces of infrastructure that need to be in place for you to be able to do your good work with children and families. And both are important. You obviously need infrastructure in order to effectively support you to have the wage, the professional development, the time, and the training to do your work well, and you need the infrastructure and the investment in order to make both happen. So I suggest that from a policy perspective, we need to create those solutions so that you are working with the children and families that you support. Question.
Real? No?
Hello, I'm Isabel. I work at New America, and I just have a question, and I don't know if this would be best for the panel or if Bridget and Eliza could better answer this, but regarding the recommendation about on-site childcare at a lot of employers, I was wondering if there's a certain threshold in terms of number of employees at which that becomes scalable. Obviously, if you have a very small business and there aren't enough people with children, that would make that something that would be affordable for the employer to subsidize or have on site. So I was just wondering about that. Thank you.
So I'll just, we're just starting to think through this in another project, but part of it, you know, I think care support, this is again why it's so important to talk about these issues more broadly as opposed to specific genders and specific children, but you can imagine small businesses supporting a community daycare that is close enough, you know, through like block associations, and that, you know, as somebody who runs this organization, we cannot afford a child care center, although we are having a New America baby boom, I will say. But you could imagine, and we're a nonprofit, but still you could imagine businesses in a particular area saying, okay, we're going to support these, you know, this child care center or these informal arrangements, perfectly possible. And again, with the digital platform, should be easy to match up parents and businesses and care.
Can I build on this? I think what's also happening and that has to be considered is especially the new generation that's moving toward remote employees. And on-site childcare is, I think, a great solution, but not the only one. I think there has to be in-home solutions. We've had like clients, we also provide benefits to employers. And we've had clients surprised that when they started to introduce in-home, that became the majority of the demand because families don't want to drive their children actually far, close to work. That you have to commute your children, especially if they're ill, you want them to be closer to home. And so we're actually trying to find affordable care solutions, leveraging an incredible system that was actually led by Child Care Aware and family caregivers with what had to happen for the military. We're trying to figure out, are there solutions around affordable care and family child care, not only in center, that can service small businesses, can service employees that live far or want to work remotely, because there is a move in the business environment in that direction. And on-site childcare does serve a purpose, but not the complete solution.
I would
Oh,
I was
okay.
just going to add another point of emphasis around the idea of the college having center-based care or accessible childcare for individuals who are in college. So same issue.
Dan wanted to, if you can give me a second to weigh in.
Here comes the
And microphone.
Yeah.
One of the things you can do as you're restructuring the existing tax credit is to basically try and make it so that businesses can pool and still be able to get the credit. And that's along the lines of what you're talking about, because you may be too small to do it yourself, but there may be a critical mass within a 2-block area that you might be able to do that. And there's a possibility there for actually new lines of business where, you know, firms may get in the business of running daycares that then they can kind of like pool and manage for other companies. So it's something we've thought about. I certainly don't have the details worked out on that, but it's a way that you can go using the existing incentives and trying to build on it. So.
One question, 6 answers.
Right. I'll just, very, very briefly, as Dan was saying, only 7% of companies in this country offer on-site or near-site childcare. That's down from 9% a few years ago. But just as Anne Marie and Sheila have been saying, there have been experiments. Say, for instance, in Atlanta, there was a downtown consortium where a number of companies pooled their resources, and they did have childcare that actually ended up closing. And then there have been other experiments. I think Ford, several years ago, they set up a system of family home networks because they had workers in plants in a number of different places. So there have been experiments tried, and some of them have been very successful.
There's also so many ways that low-income families have had to be really creative about how they provide and support. So the friends and family, neighbor, you know, one person who maybe works as a caregiver sometime actually decides to stay home and care for the kids in the neighborhood. I mean, all of that informal care infrastructure, we should be figuring out how we support and leverage and add oxygen to because that's what people have figured out works. So I don't think it's about formalizing everything, but actually investing in the many different ways that people are caring for their families and creating more choices for people in that context.
Can I just add one
Great,
additional quick comment? You have a lot of passionate people on this panel, and that is around this idea of the cobbled together care system. And so I would just implore all of us to really think about, again, what's happening in the earliest years of life and the continuity piece, and keeping the child at the center of the decision making. So what is in the best interest of the children as it's related to their child development and their early childhood and continuity of care?
Who's next?
Hi, my name is Corey Stema. I'm a child care policy researcher. I just was wondering if you have any thoughts on one of the issues that I see in my research is kind of a bifurcation of the conversation about custodial care, caring for children when their parents are working or when they actually need physical care, and early education. So, there's been some movement to combine these, but you're all talking as if we're combining them. But for example, when you look at even kindergarten and some pre-K program, they're half day. And so I guess I want to, and the advocacy groups are split sometimes along those lines as well. So I guess I'm wondering your thoughts about maybe uniting these groups that don't always work together, sometimes for strategic reasons, and how can we have that conversation about early education that is developmentally appropriate, but also covers the time frame that most parents are working.
Conflict among nonprofit advocacy groups?
Absolutely. I mean, your point is where I think, and why you hear direction so similar. You know, we talked earlier and asked the question about what road have we traveled. I think one of the most important roads we've traveled is that we understand that adult relationships are so critical in early childhood, and so both and can be true. You can need a workforce support, and that child needs a quality early learning setting, because in both situations, children are learning, and we're growing our communities. So absolutely, without a doubt, we need to come together as a community of of all of us that are sitting on this panel and other than in the care industry, and it can be early childhood education, should be early childhood education, should be a workforce support. Both things are true at the same time, and we can't forget in that constellation, families. It's about families, communities, and children for the betterment of our entire national community. So absolutely, we should all come together around this.
I feel really optimistic about this, and in any role that we can play to bring together, and we're not going to be the only company that we invite to help. So for example, in supporting IGEN's work at NDWA with the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, specifically California and Massachusetts, we've been supportive in a sense of bringing the nanny agency and the industry to the table to actually review the policy along with NDWA to say what works for the care industry. As IGEN was pointing out, it's like what is working for families and what's working for children that's best for them, as Lynette pointed out, but how do we all come together? And I actually think care, especially the nonprofits, I mean, it's the whole definition of care, right? Is like come together using the power of policy and data so that we can be a voice that's heard louder around these issues.
Yeah, I'll just add, when I started talking about care and became president of New America, it was roughly around the same time, and very early on, the early education program called me in and said, wait a minute, there's a big divide here. When you say care, many people think you're changing diapers rather than early education, you're shaping brains. And you heard me joking about conflict among advocacy groups, but I think this report is really important. You'll see when you look at it, our early education people were a big part of the report. You heard Bridget and Eliza advocate early education as a key way of understanding care. And I'll just say, as a mother and professor, 3/4 of what I do as a parent is the same thing I did as a professor. It's teaching. It may be teaching through discipline, it may be teaching through limits, it may be teaching through engagement, but I do think there's a way of not saying it's all the same, but merging them in ways that pushes this conversation forward.
We have time for one more question.
All right, hi, I'm Julia Beck with the It's Working Project. So my question really has to do with something quite granular. So we're talking about very important issues sort of way up here. But a schedule for a young mother who has to get their child to childcare, even an on-site daycare, then shifts. And so there's the private sector question of how do you begin to help the private sector understand that just I check daycare off the list isn't fully supporting that woman, that family that needs care. I know, for example, you called a breakfast this morning. Now my children are older, but you called a breakfast this morning for a time where if I had to drop my child off, I wouldn't have made it. So something to think about.
Busted.
Sorry, Anne-Marie. I say that with love. It's said with love, Bridget. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's a big piece, and you heard us talk about flexibility at work. I think, as I think about this, I think about paid leave, access to affordable quality care, and flexibility. They have to go together. And as you started talking, I was just, the memories of screeching across town, to get either to pick my children up or to drop them off. And I'll say their father did every bit as much. So it's not just the mothers, it's the parents that have to do that. But I do think that is a very important piece, and I'm glad you raised it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the first things you start doing when you become conscious of this is, when do you have morning meetings? When do you stop? Right? We used to have faculty meetings that went to 6, and daycare often went till 5, and so that is a very important piece.
We just joined a group called the B Team, and it is a group of executives it was an idea that the elders had. If you guys haven't heard, like Richard Branson, Kofi Annan, all these guys and women, Mary Robinson, came together and said, hey, one of the pillars we really want to work on is 100% human. They also do net zero and governance and transparency, but on 100% human, what do we need to do to share as business leaders in terms of our best practices? Right? And it's an opportunity to role model in front of each other and to also use the power of media and PR to share what's working. right? So for example, I've got 2 female executives on my management team, and both have little kids. I don't start my meetings until 9:30. It helps that I'm a female CEO, and I have an understanding. I look at guys around the room, they're like, we can start at 8. And I said, no, we can't start at 8 because the other 2 have to get their kids ready to go to school, which means we're starting at 9:30. You know, and so it is that sort of how do we share those best practices all the way around, and it will take time because it's a cultural norm change, and that's why I think paid leave, and you're gonna keep hearing me about the passion on that, is because if we can make movements and successes like that, it becomes proximate to business leaders. It becomes real, and they're like, okay, this is working. I see it in the data. Productivity improved. Absenteeism's going down. Now let me move on and support the next thing. Now let me move and do the culture change that I need to and the norm change in my company because these things are working.
It's 10:59.
All right, well, we want to thank everyone, and we want to thank all of you for coming today. We want to thank our panel. We want to thank our moderator. We want to thank the representatives from the campaign that came today, most especially Sheila with care.com and the folks from A.T. Kearney who were so instrumental in helping us support this work, and our advisory council in getting this out. We've had so many great groups. We talk about all of the, we got a lot of people coming across many different disciplines to help us think through this report. We want to thank all of them. Long story short, who came with us on all the great fun doing all sorts of videos. Our comms team was just unbelievably invaluable. So we have a lot of people to thank, a lot of people and voices that were part of this report. And thank all of us. In 1971, when Richard Nixon vetoed the universal child care bill, he said we hadn't had a great debate. Now it's starting.